I'm going to be speaking a little bit on Lenin's work, What is to be Done, and I'm going to try to also explain why I think this is what has to be done now in the context of rebuilding the revolutionary socialist movement here in the United States. So, by way of introduction, I just a few points. I want to start by saying that by recognizing that the global capitalist system is in an economic and political crisis. Global inequality is rapidly increasing to unprecedented levels. The ruling classes in the capitalist countries, in most of the world, are engaging in more direct and overt forms of class war against their people. And inter-imperialist crisis is pushing more countries towards war. And if I were a pessimistic person, I would say that we're possibly already in the early stages of a world war. On the other hand, global unrest, protest, and class struggle internationally reached an unprecedented peak by the eve of the pandemic, and I would argue has been scaling up amid the brewing crises ever since. I, uh, I was just reading today, anecdotally, well, in terms of supporting um, or illustrating an example of this. It was just published a 2025 Tufts University poll. And there's been a trending in polling in the United States, basically, which really is kind of like documenting and charting the crisis and the sort of fragmentation of society and the declining support for U.S. ruling institutions. And so this recent poll was geared towards 18 to 29-year-olds and gauging support for U.S. ruling institutions. And what's interesting is that this poll shows what could be characterized as a generational collapse amongst people under the 30 in terms of their support for the U.S. government and for the U.S. Ruling institutions. And so I quote from the survey: 31% of the Gen Z survey respondents who do not buy into the value of U.S. democracy, I would say bourgeois democracy. They have little confidence that the system works for them. Just 36% of people under 30 say the U.S. democracy can address the issues the country is facing. Only 7% strongly agree that the crises of this system can be resolved through the existing institutions, while 84% of respondents believe that the bourgeois democratic system, or the U.S. democratic system, is failing them. And so this is where I want to leap into talking a little bit about Lenin, but more specifically the project that we're engaged in, which is the formation of a new revolutionary organization, one that will be working towards the formation of a revolutionary vanguard party of the working class, and one that will engage in preparation and organization for revolutionary struggle. And so I want to look at summarizing some of the points made by Lenin in the book, What is to be Done. I want to look at two important points that he makes. One is for arguments for revolutionary theory and practice as the motor of the revolutionary socialist organization and or party. And two, the importance of and the role of the revolutionary paper as an instrument for organizing the revolutionary party and revolutionary struggle. Okay, so jumping right in, this is being written in the early stages of the development of the what becomes the Bolshevik party, but the Russian Social Democratic Party, and going through its different sort of phases of splits and its the political trajectories that emerge from that. Lenin making the argument for the steps that need to be taken in order to develop a revolutionary party. Comments on the rise of a trend within the socialist movement in Russia, but reflecting the international socialist movement as he was observing it at the time, a trend within the socialist movement of reformism and opportunism. And in this specific case, arguing against the lowering of theoretical development and theoretical application, revolutionary theoretical development and its application in the class struggle in favor of an action or movement oriented orientation of the movement. So, in other words, Lenin begins to recognize reformist trends emerging by identifying that the struggle in and of itself is more important than the development of theory to guide that struggle. And so this is one of the first sort of arguments that he makes. And this is a quote that I think we've all heard. But he says, without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And so he identifies three important elements in this stage of the development of the Russian socialist movement. The first one, he says, he says there are three important elements in the early party formation that we must focus on. And so in this first one, he says, we have to recognize and identify and combat other political trends that can divert from the revolutionary path within the socialist movement. And then secondly, he says we must vigorously combat national chauvinism, and that can be successful only if we understand and implement the experience of socialists and class struggles in other countries. And he says international forces have grown to the extent that there is a reserve of theoretical forces and political as well as revolutionary experience that is required to fulfill this task. So he's pointing out that we have to combat reformism and opportunism, but we also have to see that we're part of an international revolutionary movement, that we can learn from each other. And then the third thing he points out is, given the enormity of the task of revolution, the role of vanguard fighter can be fulfilled only by a party that is guided by the most advanced theory. And so revolutionary theory propels action if it is grounded in the practice of scientific socialism. And that in shorthand, using theory, applying theory, theory itself is developed by learning from previous practice, combining theory and practice, assessing from that lessons that can be distilled into new theory, incorporating successful applications of theory into practice, etc. And so that was the kind of introduction to into the first point about the importance of revolutionary theory. But then in the next part, Lenin describes, he begins to talk about the different types of consciousness that become manifest in the class struggle. And so he describes the development and evolution of consciousness in the form of types of actions taken and how workers understand why they're taking that action. And so he describes the primary stage of class struggle or action taken by the working class, or the initial stage, is spontaneous. And that can be in the form of a riot, it can be in the form of a strike, or some other kind of disruptive protest in which the working class is reacting to class exploitation and typically is reacting with the intention to achieve some kind of reform or some kind of change that will improve the conditions that are leading them to protest in the first place. And so he's identifying spontaneity in this sense as an initial form, what he calls an embryonic form of consciousness. And he distinguishes this, and I'm going to build on this, from what he calls social democratic consciousness, but what I'll call revolutionary socialist consciousness here, which is instead of being an action geared towards reform, it's an action consciously geared towards revolution. So Lenin distinguishes between embryonic class consciousness, what he refers to as trade union consciousness. This can also be understood as basic class consciousness. But the idea, a stage of consciousness in which workers begin to understand that they're part of a class, that they're opposed to the class that owns the means of production, that they need unionization, they need a collective, a system to counter the power of the bosses. And ultimately, through this kind of power, they can achieve reform. Again, this is a stage that he identifies as something that is, instinctive or at least an initial form of consciousness, counterposing this to something distinct, the revolutionary socialist consciousness, which is an understanding that we're not, a level of consciousness in which we understand that we're fighting against the system, that is represented by a boss or by the owners of the means of production, but it's a larger system that is generating the exploitation and oppression that the workers are experiencing, and therefore fighting against this system, understanding that system and understanding that we need to fight it as a system is, this revolutionary socialist consciousness, or what he calls social democratic consciousness. I'm just using these terms interchangeably because I know, we know today social democratic means something different, but at this time it was this was meant to be a forerunner to, revolutionary socialism or communism. And so he says, as I've already stated, the spontaneous element of working class struggle is consciousness in its embryonic form. In spontaneous struggle, workers reach trade union consciousness in the sense that they are taking action against class oppression as an economic issue, but not against the system that compels oppression. Trade union struggle alone does not lead to socialist consciousness. Socialist consciousness is not spontaneously driven or incrementally involved, but is comprehensively developed as a conscious understanding of the need for the working class to act directly against the system through revolutionary action. For spontaneous struggle, trade union struggle to develop into revolutionary political consciousness, he says there must be a second element, the revolutionary vanguard element or revolutionary socialist party. And he says socialism and the class struggle arise side by side and not one out of the other. Each arises under different conditions. The revolutionary vanguard is the converged element of the working class that has attained socialist consciousness, is the most militant, and vies for class leadership against the reformist and counter-revolutionary elements inside the working class. And so while Lenin says the working class spontaneously gravitates towards socialism, nevertheless, most widespread and continuously and diversely revived bourgeois ideology spontaneously imposes itself upon the working class to a still greater degree. End quote. This is where we get the conception of uneven or mixed or contradictory consciousness within the working class movement, which by itself cannot transcend or negate its own limitations without another organized force, i.e. the role of revolutionaries and the Revolutionary Party in the struggle, acting upon it. And so again, Lenin, quote, "The task of social democracy is to imbue the proletariat, literally saturate the proletariat, with the consciousness of its position and the consciousness of its task. Revolutionary theory and its application and practice, therefore, are the necessary ingredients that combine to advance revolutionary shifts in the class struggle." And so I'm repeating myself a little bit because Lenin did that a lot, and I'm only doing it because Lenin did that a lot. Therefore, for spontaneous or trade union struggle to develop towards revolutionary struggle, class struggle must be conjoined with revolutionary theory, practice, and the cohesion of a revolutionary vanguard party within the working class. Again, the most conscious and determined militant and revolutionary elements working together. The development of this trajectory increases political consciousness or socialist consciousness within the working class as a whole. Meaning the revolutionary working class vanguard party can act consciously toward its revolutionary objectives in the context of the class struggle. So Lenin says working class people, in another part, in another later essay, he says working class people are instinctively socialist, but there is a need for the revolutionary. There is a need for a revolution.
It's certainly
okay. Take two. And so Lenin specifically comments on the need for that organized revolutionary organization or party to bring socialist ideas from the outside into the class struggle. Now, this is somewhat of a controversial point, but what he's arguing is not from outside, meaning that working class people can't be socialist or achieve at some level socialist consciousness, but he means outside the confines of the immediate economic struggle. And so that revolutionary socialist theory and practice is brought into the class struggle to counter bourgeois ideology and its limits, to direct action and understanding of the oppressive ruling class and the capitalist system as the source of all exploitation and oppression, and thereby create the conditions through which class consciousness can be elevated to revolutionary consciousness. And this part might sound a little complex, but the scale of the struggle, the evolution of experience of the working class in struggle, and in relation to the size and influence of a coherent revolutionary vanguard can determine the scale of action, its political character, and the possibility for it to pass from being limited to reformist aims or to advance towards revolutionary ones. In other words, the shift towards revolutionary consciousness in the working class, depending on these factors, can either stay stagnant, can develop incrementally, or only affect small numbers, or can shift very quickly and on a large scale based on the configuration of circumstances. Most importantly, the scale of the crisis, the size, the integration and influence of revolutionaries within that working class vanguard, and the specific twists and turns of the class struggle and how it plays out in that context. But he also observes two problems. One is that without the experience of seeing how class struggle spontaneity itself does not automatically lead to socialist consciousness and advancement in the struggle beyond demands for reform, and how the allure of spontaneous mass action and its progression can lead socialists to a type of reformism, towards a path of reformism that he refers to specifically as economism. This is where socialists inflate trade union struggle as a means to educate workers towards revolutionary consciousness, but which in fact downplays the importance of revolutionary theory and practice, and therefore leads to a gradual abandonment of the very concept of the need for a revolutionary vanguard party and the need for revolution itself. This practice of organized socialist economism is seen in many groups on the left, and I would, it's by far the dominant strain within the socialist left. I would argue, most obviously the DSA, but I would argue other groups from Solidarity to Tempest practice forms of this kind of socialist economism, which uplifts the class struggle and the importance of class struggle, but essentially rejects, downplays, or even abandons the revolutionary vanguard party and therefore revolution as a task. And so, concluding this part, and I'm almost done, Lenin to quote Lenin very, again, directly in this case, he didn't mince words a lot. Hence, our task, the task of revolutionary socialists, is to combat spontaneity, to divert the working class movement from this spontaneous trade unionist striving to come under the wing of the bourgeoisie, and instead to bring it under the wing of revolutionary socialism. The last part I'm going to talk about, and this will be quick, I know I'm going on a little bit long here, is about the revolutionary newspaper. And I really pushed Jason to let me include this in here. Just kidding. But the role of the paper, I think, is really important, and so did Lenin. So let's hear from Lenin. And so in chapter 5B, can a newspaper be a revolutionary? Can be a collective organizer, and what type of organization to require? He focuses on debates within the Russian socialists, Russian socialist movement, on the question of the revolutionary paper, and he summarizes a debate that's taking place between groups that emphasize the need for local, very specific papers geared towards local struggle versus a national paper. And he articulates some of the points of view of those arguing for local first, national later, and he argues for national first as a means to build the locals. He says the whole point. He says, and it's to summarize this, he says the whole point is that there's no other way of training strong local political organizations except through the medium of an all-Russian newspaper. He says local work would become far richer and more varied than it is now. A national revolutionary paper could help overcome fragmentation and create a unified revolutionary party. The newspaper would provide a common platform for discussion, solidify ideological unity, and help connect disparate elements of the movement across the country. And then this is a quote: the publication of an all-Russian political newspaper must be the main line by adhering to which we could unswervingly develop deeper and expand this organization, i.e. a revolutionary organization always prepared to support every protest and every outbreak. A newspaper is not only a collective propagandist and a collective agitator, but also a collective organizer. In this respect, it can be compared to the scaffolding erected around a building in construction. He has this whole bricklayer analogy. It marks the contours of the structure, the scaffolding does, and facilitates communication between the builders, permitting them to distribute the work and to view the common results achieved by their organized labor. Lenin also emphasized the importance of giving workers the widest opportunity to write for our paper, sharing their experiences and reports from the field. This would allow the party to generalize these experiences, uncover deeper processes of the class struggle, and use them to guide for future action.